Welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad. Tehami. Pakistan's caretaker Prime Minister Mr. Anwarul Haq Kakar says this: Pakistan is focusing on its own interests without choosing the sides in the great power competition. He said this in an interview with Washington Post on the sidelines when he visited a United Nations General Assembly to attend the 78th session. The Prime Minister said the West is obsessed with containing China, and he also said that Pakistan has no intention of committing to the either camp of the growing US-China rivalry. Pakistan saw China as an all-weather friend and a strategic partner. He also went on to say that Pakistan intends to stay neutral on Russia's war with Ukraine. At the same time saying Ukraine crisis is creating challenges and creating opportunities also within the region, and we are looking at it both ways. The Prime Minister further said Pakistan in the last 30 years has been treated unfairly by the West. The Prime Minister also laid emphasis on collective efforts to deal with the kind of challenges on the global scale. We'll be taking the experts' analysis on these statements of caretaker Prime Minister regarding Pakistan's foreign policy. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Jauhar Saleem. He is former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. Mr. Jawad, thank you very much for taking time out. We really appreciate that. At the same time, in the studio, we are being joined by Brigadier retired Shahid Jagir. He is Senior Analyst. Brigadier Jagir, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Now, let me begin with you, Mr. Jauhar, by looking at this particular statement by caretaker Prime Minister that Pakistan is focusing on its own interests without choosing sides in the great power competition. What's your analysis of that?
I think what the Prime Minister has said in this particular interview with the Washington Post, the essence of it is very apt. Pakistan, like any other country in the world, is primarily concerned with its own objectives and interests. We have deep-rooted friendships, both with China and the US. With China, we have this all-weather strategic partnership, a relationship which has stood the test of time and challenges. China is also our largest trading partner in the world. It's our largest investment partner. It's the biggest defense partner. And the closeness between the peoples of Pakistan and China is exemplary in many, many domains. In the international fora as well, Pakistan and China have an excellent record of cooperation. Now, with the US as well, Pakistan has a great relationship. Relations between Pakistan and the US, they predate our relations with China in some ways. And over the years, the two countries, there have been large trading partners. US has been one of the largest trading partners of Pakistan and still is. Pakistan has one of the biggest trade surpluses in the world from its trade to the US, trade with the US. Pakistan also has one of its biggest diasporas in the world residing in the US, which is a very important linkage as well. There is a history of strategic partnership, history of defense partnership, history of cooperation in so many areas, development partnership. We were partners in trying to bring peace to Afghanistan during the Cold War era as well. Pakistan was one of the closest partners of the US in this region. So these two countries comprise some of the most important partners of Pakistan in the world. And there should be no competition. There should be, these type of relationships should not be mutually exclusive. The US has relationships with so many different countries, some of which are hostile to each other sometimes. Pakistan and India are a case in point. But that doesn't mean that what happens between Pakistan and India should affect America's relations with India or Pakistan, and that's what their endeavor is always. And in the same way, Pakistan is not a superpower, but at the same time, Pakistan is a country of 240 million people, one of the largest countries in the world in terms of population. It's a developing country with great potential. It's a nuclear power. It's one of the most important Muslim countries in the world. So naturally, it has to look after its own interests. Now, what the Prime Minister said in that interview, what you pointed out, where he said the US or the West is over-obsessed. Of course, the Prime Minister meant overly obsessed or too preoccupied, I think, to put it even more diplomatically, with China. And I think that is based on mistrust of intentions. Because for a lot of neutral observers, China does not harbor any designs which should threaten Western interests. China is a country which is very focused on economic development. It's still a developing country. We have to remember that. It has a per capita of about $15,000, but it's far from being a developed country. Although its industry, the level of technology in many, many segments is at par with the developed economies. But because the population is so large, so it's not easy. It has brought 800 million people out of poverty, but still there's a lot of catching up to do. So China's, I think, primary focus is on development. And that development has to be, because it's one of the second largest economy, and perhaps would catch up with the US at some point in time, in the not too far away in the future. So because of that, the development which they want cannot happen in isolation. In today's world, countries and countries' economies are interdependent. And the more linkages there are, the better it is for everyone. And China has invested a lot in the last decade or so in creating and establishing those linkages. This Belt and Road Initiative, there's so many other forums, and just this BRI project, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of investment by China in so many different countries, including Pakistan, the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is a flagship project of BRI. It's an evidence of that. China's interest in promoting connectivity, promoting development, promoting trade, promoting investment. So I think in that, and Pakistan is not alone. Many, many countries in the world, whether they are in Asia, Africa, even in Europe, they're the partners with China in South America in the global endeavor that they're taking. And I believe, and this is as ambassador to many Western countries, including Germany and Italy, in the past, I have tried to disabuse the notions which are very popular in many Western countries, that China has some sort of hegemonic.
Right. You already mentioned that is because of the mistrust of intentions. I'll come to take your detailed view regarding that later. Let me bring in Brigadier Jagir also into the discussion. Brigadier Jagir, how do you look at this particular statement by Prime Minister regarding Pakistan focusing on its own interests without choosing side of the great power competition?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you. What all the Honorable Foreign Minister has said, absolutely. I take the lead from that. And, you know, in the geopolitics, every nation looks after his interests first. And your alliances, your cooperation, whether economic, military, or others, they are all on the principle of win-win situation for both. The second thing is that what is happening between China and USA, it's not something which is very unusual. If you look at the world history, this has happened in the past. You talk of the Roman Empire, you talk of any other empire which was at the peak of the power, and there is another power rising, it always try to have its reservation about its rise. So that is what exactly, and Prime Minister very categorically and very in very clear words have said that America is over obsessed with the China's rise. It is very clear that China will continue to progress because of its policies, not involving with any country militarily, having the principle of resorting the disputes between other countries in a diplomatic manner. So, for us, China is our iron friend, it's our neighbor. It has a very hopeful and progressive idea of BRI, which is very much helpful to us and will help a long way, not only to help the Pakistan, but also this complete South Asia, West Asia and Europe. So, yes, at the moment it is very difficult for Pakistani diplomats and foreign office to rightly navigate between this troubled water. You know, one side the American hegemony designs of its New World Order. On the other side, we have a friend which has always come to our help and is ready to help us in the future also. On the other side, there is an ally, I would say, who is very unpredictable, you know, where the interest of the West comes in, they see the Pakistan as the most useful partner. You know, that is the history of the past. But the moment their interest is gone, is served, we are treated as the expendables. So, we have to see our own national interest, that where we get the maximum benefit out of these two blocks, whatever you call the blocks, the countries, the big powers, we have to see, and we are very conscious of this fact. People at the helm of affair are very, very conscious of this fact, and that is why you have seen that we try to maintain a neutrality in the Ukraine war.
I'll come to that point of neutrality of Pakistan regarding the Ukraine conflict. Now, you already mentioned the kind of relationship Pakistan particularly had towards the US, right? So, is it because of this fact, which Prime Minister also talked about, by siding with the West against the Soviets and against, after 9/11, Pakistan paid a high price. And he also said Pakistan in the last 30 years has been treated unfairly by the West. So, is it because of that Pakistan has finally decided to be neutral rather than becoming the part of any camp?
No, look, the learned people see that thing, that in the fight between two elephants, big elephants, it's better for the minor animals to stay neutral, one. We cannot afford to be at this time to be on one side because we are dependent on America or the West for our export. We are also dependent on China as far as our borders are concerned, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, as far as future progress BRI is concerned, and also in case of any coercive activity by India, you know. So, we have to be very, very balanced in our approach in dealing with this. But yes, the history tells us that Pakistan has been dealing with its Western allies, which left it high and dry when their objective was served. You see the case of Vietnam. We are the one who established the bridge between China and US. Okay. We are the one who have suffered more than 100,000, 200,000 casualties in war on terror, being an ally with US. We are the one who have suffered more than $150 billion loss in being part of the West on the war on terror. Now, we have to see how many times you cannot deceive everyone every time, you know. So we have to be very, very careful where we do need America, because of it's still a dominant power. It has a military power, it has a technological power, it has a influence, political influence in the UN, in the UN dominated
Right.
organizations.
Right.
But at the same time, we have to give due weightage what the Chinese to the Chinese.
Right.
As well.
You earlier said that we can't afford to become the part of the either camp, choosing sides between China and the US. And at the same time, we reiterate that China happens to be the all-weather friend of Pakistan and a strategic partner. So keeping a neutrality at one end and also saying this, that that close relationship with China, how that particular thing is perceived, do you think, in the US quarters?
If you see, as I said, the Western problem is that they see that every problem of the world from their own personal interest prism. They keep their personal interest supreme, and their allies' interest, are relegated according to their weight, their standing and all. So we have to acknowledge this thing. When we move in future with Western Europe, we have to weigh our history and should not be left high and dry and expandable in the future. Right. At the same time, we need to build up on our Chinese relations.
Right. Mr. Jauhar, earlier in your take that it is because of the mistrust of intentions that the West, and in particular the US, happens to be overly obsessed with containing China. So if it is because of the mistrust of intentions, is it particularly focused regarding China or any country which happens to be or which is perceived to be closer to China?
Well, yeah, overly obsessed, of course, was not my term, but I was trying to just define as to what was meant in the interview, perhaps. But yes, they are too preoccupied with it. And for the time being, it is China, which is the #1 priority in that direction. In fact, many observers say that the 21st century would be defined by the enduring rivalry between US and China. Now the question is, how will that rivalry play out? There is a natural rivalry. US is the status quoist power. China is the emerging power. There is competition, naturally. Historically, we have seen that whenever you have such an era where status quoist power is being challenged, not militarily, but in terms of economic prowess, for instance, there is friction, there are challenges, there are problems. Now, the question is how these two countries, these two great powers, will manage, will navigate those challenges. And that would have deep implications for the entire world. In particular, middle power level developing countries, such as Pakistan. The situation is objectively different from what it used to be in the 70s, because in the 70s, there were two superpowers. But at the same time, there were not really very many middling powers. And wherever there were middling powers, they were allied to one of the two superpowers. And the superpowers had the means to make countries toe their line within their respective camps. The situation has changed. There is more multipolarity now. There is more room for maneuver for countries. And we've seen that in recent years, in recent months even. You know, for instance, countries, important countries, they can now pick and choose. Look at Saudi Arabia, for instance. Their rapprochement with Iran was being helped by China. And there was a major breakthrough in many ways. On the other hand, now we hear about the possible rapprochement with Israel, which is being facilitated by the US. So the point is that there are no clear boundaries as was the case during the Cold War. Now countries, developing countries with a certain size, middle powers, they believe that in the current dispensation, they can watch out for their national interests without being an appendage or without being subordinate to any of the superpowers, the US, which is a superpower still, and China, which is seen as a possible emerging superpower. And that gives Pakistan, I think that gives us that strategic space as well. Because for Pakistan, as I've pointed out, both these relationships are very important. China, besides the things that I've said, it's also our neighbor. US is pretty far away. And the nature of our relationship is a bit different from the nature of our relationship with the US. Now, when people talk of having a balance, the balance doesn't mean that it's like a balance of equality. The balance means that the relations could be balanced in terms of what interests we have with what countries. Because relations with countries are not a zero-sum game. In fact, if you have a positive approach, then you could even play a constructive role, as we did in the past. In the 70s, we played a constructive role in bringing the US and China together. And we still have to remember that in basic perimeters, you know, the US, for China, Taiwan is of crucial importance. The US adheres to one China policy. I mean, you know, they have not, because this was the basis of their rapprochement. And they have not deviated from that in principle. Okay, you know, of course, we don't want to go into the fine details of what is going on. So Pakistan, what I mean to say is that Pakistan does not have to take sides in that black and white way. That okay, because you know, because the differences are not that type of black and white as we saw in the Cold War. Despite whatever challenges they have, the US and China and relations between them, they are still the largest trading partners in the world. They have still multiple linkages. The bilateral visits they are having are very frequent. Even recently, Henry Paulson, the former Treasury Secretary, was there, the head of a big delegation. He met the Chinese Vice President, he met Foreign Minister Wang Yi. You know, and there have been so many other visits, you know, the Secretary of State, US Secretary of State, and so many other delegations from the US and vice versa. So the thing is, they have dialogues. Right. They have all these linkages intact. They are taking a lot of steps from both sides to maintain and sustain a relationship which is crucial not just for peace and harmony for their respective regions, but the entire world because of the magnitude of that relationship.
Right. I'll come back to you to understand the perception in China and the US when a country becomes closer or becomes more friendly towards the either side. We are now joined by another participant in the show on the phone line, Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad, expert international relations. Dr. Ishtiaq, thank you very much for your time for being with us on Views on News tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Appreciate that. Now, we're taking analysis regarding this recent interview by caretaker Prime Minister Mr. Anwarul Haq Kakar to Washington Post. So, keeping that one in view, how challenging do you think is it for Pakistan to stay neutral amidst the growing China-US rivalry and at the same time maintaining its bilateral relationships with both of these countries?
I think, obviously, even in history, Pakistan has seldom taken a side. During the Cold War, obviously, like the rest of the free world, we were part of the US-led, coalition, even during peacetime. But I think in the this time, I think around 40 years. Yes, please.
Please go ahead. Dr. Ishtiaq, please go ahead.
Yeah, during this time, we have seen actually the rise of China as an emerging power, first in Asia. Now, obviously, it is a power to reckon with, globally speaking. And I think it is wise on Pakistan's part, not necessarily the caretaker prime minister, but the previous leadership also, both military and civilian, to always emphasize that Pakistan does not take side in this emerging trend in global politics, whereby America is insisting on the revival of a previous Cold War situation vis-a-vis its this policy of containing China. On the other hand, China, as your speaker pointed out, the another colleague pointed out before, is going for a win-win option. And I think if we divide the global discourse currently, we can, simply speaking, offer two kind of approach which is emerging. One is an approach which China is trying to advocate, that is a win-win option, which is in the benefit of all the world, including Pakistan and so many other countries across Asia, Africa and Latin America. And the other policy and the other discourse which is being championed by America, that is, like the same zero-sum game, revival of the Cold War. And I think that is a very unnecessary option, especially in a time when we are really deeply integrated into a global order which is based upon free trade. And I think free trade and greater integration among nations, both developed and developing, is in the interest of world peace, security and stability.
Right. Dr. Ishtiaq, when Pakistan says that China is an all-weather friend and a strategic partner, how do you think that is perceived in the US circles?
I couldn't understand the question.
When Pakistan says that China happens to be an all-weather friend of Pakistan and a strategic partner, how do you think that is usually perceived in the US quarters? Unfortunately, we've lost the connection with Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmad, expert in international relations, joining on the phone line. We'll try to reconnect to him. Mr. Jauhar, the perception when we talk about Pakistan going closer to either the US, that perception growing in China, how China perceives that friendly relation of Pakistan with the US, and likewise when Pakistan grows closer to China, how is that perceived in the US?
I was part of the former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's visit to China as part of the delegation. And what I saw there was that in China, they have a very balanced approach. They understand Pakistan's interests, they understand our predicaments, they understand our challenges, they understand our difficulties, and they understand the parameters within which we are operating. And they never request us or ask us or in any way pressurize us so to influence our relations with the Western countries. I think they have a very positive approach. China's approach is to build bridges of trade, cooperation, amity, friendship. That is the approach. Now, the US and some Western countries, as I had mentioned before, they have some, I mean, this is very evident, you know, like from the media statements that we see amongst other things. They have some doubts about China's intentions, for instance, in terms of this BRI. They think it was a strategic investment to gain further influence. Similarly, in the South China Sea, some other Chinese foreign policy endeavors are looked upon with suspicion, which I believe are not justified.
Right. Okay, let me go to Mr. Brigadier Jagir. Jagir, when we come to understand the Chinese perception of Pakistan's friendly relations or close relations or the maintenance of those relations with the US, how do you understand that?
Look, China look only to America from the prism of economic competitors, whereas USA it economic rival. That is the difference in the approach. Chinese know very well that US economy is dependent on them and vice versa. So, both these big powers, they know each other's powers, potentials and their weaknesses also. As far as Pakistan's concerned with the China has been very elaborately highlighted by my colleague. But we have to see, he has said that in a very small word that America is too far away and China is our next door neighbor, you know. So, you can ill afford to have friendship, not having the friendship with your next door neighbor and have a friendship with a person or a country which is miles and miles away. Second important thing is that the countries' relations are built up on their convergence of interests. Chinese and Pakistani interests they do converge, you know, they make a win-win situation for both. Whereas, as I have very bluntly said, that for the West we have to think that what they are saying today, will they be stand by that tomorrow or not? So, we have to play a probability game in our relations with West and Europe, depending upon their past history. In my opinion, in the future, would see the more convergence of interest of US and Pakistan, and we will never be a rival to the US. Neither we would be in that form where they can use us if we navigate correctly these troubled water which are which the world is seeing between America and China. The second important thing is that what we are seeing, that America has given a declared containment China policy. It had made Quad. It is supplying the nuclear powered submarines to Australia. And yesterday I was seeing the news that South Korea is also developing nuclear power submarines. So, that is the thing. Then the important thing is the independence of China, what they call is Hong Kong and other South China Sea, and that is not being seen good from the Chinese point of view, because from the Chinese perspective, I think they are rightly to say the no interference of the US in Hong Kong affairs. So, I think in the foreseeable future, we will see much more cordial, more binding relations with the China, and still, if we navigate correctly, have a good allies relations with the Europe and the West.
Right, Jagir, when we talk about Pakistan's relations with Russia, the dynamics, what do you think they differ from those dynamics of Pakistan's relations with China? Of course, right? But Pakistan keeping its neutrality when it comes to the Ukraine crisis, how important it is for Pakistan to keep its neutrality when it comes to the Ukraine crisis?
Look, the dynamics of the Ukraine war is totally different. Two heavyweights fighting with each other. One undercover, the second openly fighting it. One fighting alone with maybe a few of the allies, and the one is having the rest of the world behind him. So that is the, I would say, the situation on the ground is the training environment. So I would say that at this particular moment, Pakistan should remain absolutely neutral as far as the war between the West and the Russia is concerned, because Russian rivalry with the West and the Europe is centuries old, although both are Christians, but it is the economic system that they differ with. One is communist, the other is capitalist, and both, do not cannot tolerate each other. This will have a repercussion in the time to come. If we have the time, we can discuss that. But Pakistan has taken a very right stance to be neutral, not to be part of taking a side of any of the rival, whether the West.
So if we compare the dynamics of Pakistan's relations with Russia and the Pakistan's relations with China, we all know Pakistan's all strategic partnership and all-weather friendship with China, but that doesn't happen to be the case with Russia, although Pakistan has cordial relations with Russia. So as a matter of sensitivity, where do you grade? Does it become equally important for Pakistan to remain neutral in that conflict also, similar to its neutrality of not becoming a side in either two camps when it comes to US and China rivalry? The comparison of the two.
I would say that as the 21st century's terminology is, the blue is the new black, and there are 26 shades of gray. So neutrality has different dynamics, right? China is making its own type of neutrality. India is making its own type of neutrality. Now, why can't we, maintain our own type of neutrality? We don't want to get involved into this quagmire which has been created in the Ukraine, which is the most, I would say, the most versatile land producing, oozing out the grains and all, and its impact of using the depleted weapons over there, its impact on the earth and the atmosphere. Well, that's a different debate. So, will it be productive for the world? Will it be productive for the Europe? Will it be productive for the Asia? Will it be productive for others? That has to be seen, and the people at the helm of affairs should pay a heed to that. So, Pakistan will try and should try to maintain a neutrality between in this war.
Right. Let me take Mr. Jauhar's view regarding this particular. The comparison or the sensitivity when we talk about Pakistan's relations with China, of course, all were the strategic partnership, but not that case when we talk about Pakistan and Russia relations. Of course, they are cordial as we speak. So, how crucial is Pakistan to keep its neutrality in that particular conflict also?
Well, our policy is clear on that. What we've said is that we are and we want to be partners in peace and not in conflict. So we will not pick sides in that conflict. We will endeavor to promote peace. We will support the initiatives for peace. We really want the military conflict there to end. We want it to end through peaceful dialogues, because this conflict is creating a lot of instability in the world, not just in Europe, and economic instability as well. And that is hurting developing countries. And then, of course, the devastation that we see there, the loss of life and property, it's not just fair to the people there. And that has been a clear stance that we have. So far as the relations between Pakistan and Russia are concerned, we enjoy very good relations, close relations. There's a good bit of trade as well. There are many other linkages between the two countries. Now there's, on the other side, we've already talked about Pakistan's relations with China. Now the dynamics of these relationships are different, and that's a normal thing for all countries. That's how foreign policies of countries is run. Countries based on their size, on their proximity, on the economic linkages that you have, on the history. There's so many factors which define relationships between countries, sometimes ideological or cultural affinities, so many different factors which play a role. But our primary intention is to have friendly relations with countries, particularly within our region, and Russia is not too far away from Pakistan. And our intention is to build economic bridges, connectivity. I think there have been dialogue between Pakistan and Russia on that, and we see many, many indications that the economic relations between Pakistan and Russia in future could be enhanced. So I believe that the stance that we have taken is a principled one, is a fair one, and is very much defined by the tenets of international relations.
Right. Mr. Jauhar, one last question. When a caretaker Prime Minister talks about the challenges that have emerged after the Ukraine crisis, he talks about the opportunities at the same time also, and saying that Pakistan looks at it both ways. What do you understand of that? The opportunities?
Yeah, I think, of course, the Prime Minister, what he meant was, we're not being opportunistic here in any ways. What he meant was the ability to turn challenges into opportunities. Right. Because whenever there's a conflict, it's an opportunity as well to build peace. Because and after a conflict, what happens? When the peace is restored, there's so much rebuilding, economic rebuilding that has to be done. And that means much more economic potential to build relations. And also, the Prime Minister meant was that, the impact of, for example, what he said was that because the demand of oil in Europe went down because of that, so probably it benefited some other countries. In our region, for instance, like India is one country which has tremendously benefited from that. Their import of Russian oil went many, many times, quadrupled, even quintupled during the last few years. So there could be opportunities, but we are not looking to be opportunistic here.
Right.
What we want is peace and development for all countries. What we want to see is countries building bridges of peace and connectivity and development and trade.
Your point is well taken. Unfortunately, we're short of time. Very quick last closing comment regarding the opportunities emerging after the Ukraine crisis. Brigadier Jagir.
Sorry?
Opportunities from the Ukraine crisis. The statement by caretaker Prime Minister.
Yes. The best way to remain the neutral, one of the purpose of that is to harness onto those opportunities which are likely to arrive when this conflict gets over. You know, before this conflict starts, we had a good relation with Ukraine also. So where we are moving toward a better, the one of you know, the very good relations with the Russians, which have played very important part in the solving the Afghanistan issue with us, and they have respected our approach towards the Afghanistan problem. So at the same time, we had a very good relation with the Ukraine also. Therefore, he is very right when he says that we should be optimistic,
Right.
and would be cashing on to the
Right. Brigadier retired Shahid Jagir, senior analyst. Unfortunately, we're short of time. I'll have to end the show over here. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Mr. Jawad Saleem, former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for being with us.